I also would caution us today to not equate thinking with intelligence. I think I'm intelligent, I'm thoughtful. Yeah, I think a lot of humans are. It's how do you make your decisions?
If we have a function that we just aren't a big fan of, a lot of times it's actually causing real damage and real problems. If you've been avoiding or pushing away, having a little bit might feel like it's making things worse initially. It's like taking the tape off of a check engine light on your car. If you put tape over it so you didn't have to see it, well, I don't have any problems, right? You take the tape off and you're like, oh, I guess maybe I actually do have a big problem.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So this is part 3 of what has ended up being a 4-part series.
Yeah.
We're moving through all of the 8 Jungian cognitive functions of personality. Whew, that was a mouthful. Talking about actually seeing them like they're like nutrients in the system of our life. Just like you have vitamins that you take for your physical nutrient, you eat food that has vitamins in it, or you take vitamin supplements. Well, if you have a vitamin deficiency in your nutrition, you have to go find the vitamins to be able to take, either through food or supplement. And so we want to look at personality cognitive functions in the same vein. If you have a deficiency in one of these areas of life, well, we're going to point to where you might need to shore that up with some quote unquote nutrients of personality. Now, if you're brand new to personality type, we're going to go into a little bit of some deeper concepts today around cognitive functions. If you don't know what that is, or you're new, or you need a refresher, head over to personalityhacker.com/car model. We use a car model to illustrate the mental processes of your mind. Your personality type just points to how you're learning information, making decisions. And that car model should explain the framework we're using today. So if you go and download that and look at that information, that will help you unpack what we're talking about today. Yeah. And today we're going to approach the 2 cognitive functions, Antonia, that are the thinking processes, mental process. And we're also dipping into now decision making. On the last 2 episodes, we talked about perception, how we perceive the world with our senses or intuition. Now we're going to start talking about how we judge about what we perceive. How do we make decisions based on that criteria?
Yep. And that's right. We're doing thinking. I keep thinking we're doing feeling. So my brain is all like...
Next time.
We'll do it next time. This also comes on the heels of a 2-part series where we discussed how cognitive functions are also that they're there to keep us safe.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's if we're missing them, then we might be missing something that has our back and is ensuring that we are able to see all the things coming at us. Now, it depends on, I think what's nice about seeing functions also as nutrients is that we don't need the same amount of each nutrient. We need a varying amount of each nutrient, meaning that like there's a certain, like we need more vitamin C than say we need vitamin B, or we need, or it depends on the vitamin B, but it's like,
sure,
it's not the exact same amount. And it's the same case with functions depending upon our type. We might need more of a certain function in our life because it's a preferred function. So we're going to need a lot more of that in order to feel good about it, or to feel good about that aspect of our life, than we will if it's a less preferred function. But we need all of them. And I think that's kind of the sort of the foundational thought, is even if a function is not preferred, or if it's what's called a shadow function, it's really far down there, we still need it represented in our life in order to avoid having certain pain points. And the illustration we've been using is if you don't have enough, say, potassium, your body communicates that to you with cramps, right? You'll get a muscle cramp. And the muscle cramp is a pain point that says you probably need a little bit more of this nutrient in your diet.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with functions. If we don't have enough of a function in our life, we're going to have a pain point. And what we're talking about are the pain points that communicate we need more of this function in our life. And then at the end of the episode, we'll talk about maybe a couple exercises you can do to add a little bit more to your life.
Something that surprised me, not completely off subject, but slightly a divergent. I was talking to somebody and they were showing me how this one company, it was like an iron making company, metal, and they sell the iron shavings from their metalwork to cereal companies.
Yep.
Breakfast companies.
Yes, for iron.
To actually sprinkle like actual pieces of iron. And I thought iron was like it's actual real iron.
Yeah.
Like that, I learned that a few years ago. I was like, wait, we're actually eating real iron, like
your
pieces of iron. Like you just think it's like embedded in the food.
Yes.
But they're sprinkling actual iron into our cereal.
Yes, that's why the word fortified is like sometimes suspicious.
And I just thought, like, that's really interesting. But you wouldn't want a lot of that.
No.
You'd want a sparse amount, a
Yeah.
sparing amount, because too much probably will hurt the body.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these things, depending on how you're wired, because your personality type will dictate how much of these nutrients, quote unquote, you need in your life. Some of them make sense to you. We need all of them in our life, just like we need iron.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't need tons of it represented. So you might be a personality type, as we talk about one of these thinking functions today, and go, well, I'm a feeler. Maybe I'm even a feeler dominant or a driver with a feeling process, EFJ or, IFP or something. Well, even if you're a feeling dominant, there's still some sprinkling or smattering of thinking that you need in your life, obviously. And so I think as we enter this today, just understand that we're talking about it again from almost like if your personality type was a diet you were on, or you needed these different nutrients. And I also would caution us today too to not equate thinking with intelligence,
right,
or thoughtfulness.
Right.
Those are different concepts. So as you're listening today going, well, how can I think I'm intelligent, I'm thoughtful. Yeah, I think a lot of humans are. Many humans are thoughtful and they think deeply. It's how do you make your decisions? So don't conflate, again, intelligence with thoughtfulness or with the thinking processes.
Right. Yeah. And then the same goes for the feeling functions in the next episode. Don't conflate those for being a person of value or a person
Compassion.
who has, a conscience or compassion. Exactly. I think those are really important. And before we get into the specific functions, it's good to remember that if a function is one of your first 4, that's actually considered a preferred function. Even if it's in the car model, we call it the 3-year-old or the inferior function. Even if it's an inferior function, it's still a preferred function. So when we talk about your preferred function, you're gonna need more of this in your life. If it's a function that is not in your car model, if it's what's called a shadow function, and especially if it's way down there, you don't need as much of it represented, but you still need some, right? A lot of it can be outsourced. A lot of it can be people in our life that cover those bases for us, but we still need some of it. We can't survive without all 8 of these functions. And so having enough represented to be able to determine your relationship to it. And when this thing shows up, are you resistant? Do you tend to push it away? Those are good questions. And they're actually, a lot of this content is emergent and derived from our Personality Life Path program, where we spend 8 weeks going into what is our relationship to each of these functions. And a lot is unearthed. Like if we have a function that we just aren't a big fan of, we find that pushing it away doesn't simply create some, sort of like vacuums or blind spots. It's not as neutral as that. A lot of times it's actually causing real damage and real problems. And so understanding one's relationship to that function is part of how we unearth or diagnose some of our challenges that are otherwise sort of mysterious to us.
Yeah.
Right. And so having a little bit in your diet, weirdly enough, having a little bit, if you've been avoiding or pushing away, having a little bit might almost make feel like it's making things worse initially. But that's just revealing the problem. It's like taking the tape off of a check engine light on your car. It's like if you put tape over it so you didn't have to see it, well, I don't have any problems, right? You take the tape off and you're like, oh, I guess maybe I actually do have a big problem.
Yes.
And so it feels worse initially, but what it means now is that you're attuned to it and you can now do something about it.
So we talk about the 8 cognitive functions. 4 of them are going to be conscious for you. You're going to be able to see them. They're what's called ego-syntonic. But 4 of them are going to be in the shadow for you. And again, this depends on your personality type. You can take a test or come get a personality assessment by one of our personality profilers. Or if you already know your personality type, you can find this information of which will be in your shadow. So everyone's going to be a little different. We'll talk about the 2 thinking functions today. And one of them that we talk about, you may not be as aware of as the other because it's going to be down. It might be pulling you from the shadows. It might be influencing you without you even knowing it. Now, when we talk about thinking, and we mentioned this on the very first part of this 4-part series, Antonia. We said, Jungian people, the Jungian analysts of the world, the people that came from Carl Jung that didn't really get into the Myers-Briggs system, see 4 cognitive functions, right? Of sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. The Myers-Briggs system takes those and splits them into yet 2 versions of each, one outwardly focused, one inwardly focused. So when we talk about thinking today, we're going to apply it in the external world with an attitude of extroverted thinking, and we're going to look at introverted thinking with the attitude inwardly focused. But thinking in general is about problem solving. It's really about looking at some issue or situation and addressing it and overcoming it, solving that problem. It's not about managing people's emotions. It's not about tuning into the human experience. It's about accomplishing or problem solving in the world, I think, in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, I'm going to be a thinker type and quibble a little bit.
Please do.
Just to create some clarity, not all Jungians only see those four.
Fair enough.
Because they are basing it off of, psychological types, which fillets them all out. But
many Jungians
Thank you. Don't. Yeah, exactly. There's
school of thought.
There are certain schools of thought where they don't see the attitudes at all, and there are some schools of thought that they only see the attitudes in some contexts and not others, and yada yada. But sorry,
I think that's. I appreciate it because I don't want to undermine what we're going to talk about today through somebody going, well, they don't know what they're talking about.
They don't know what they're talking about.
Thank you for giving even more nuance to the framework there. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about, I actually want to start with the function you use preferentially.
Because it's
Antonia.
the best.
We've nicknamed this accuracy.
Yeah.
But let's talk about accuracy. Its technical name is Introverted Thinking. Mm-hmm. And it's about logical consistency of thought and looking for the core principles of thinking, almost distilling things down to the point, almost like prime numbers. You can't break them apart anymore. The core principles of the world, the principles that we use to build all other thought from. This is really what introverted thinking or accuracy is on the hunt for.
Yes. And I think I've mentioned this in the other podcast episodes. If I didn't, then I'll mention it now. Sometimes I forget where I say things. But I have... and I keep using this phrase in overly overly simplified, maybe too reductionist perspective, but I think it's incredibly helpful that the extroverted functions are meant for living and experiencing life and engaging, and the introverted functions are for processing what has been engaged. So if you think about thinking introverted, it's effectively processing thought. And when we're processing thought, what are we doing? Well, we're trying to figure something out. We're trying to, like you said, thinking is really about problem solving, but it's not necessarily applied problem solving. It's not trying to how do I fit this thing into this other thing? Or how do I construct something so that it will all work together in this machine? Or it's not necessarily applied to the outside world. It's more about figuring something out internally until it makes sense to you. Maybe making the math line up. And the math could be literal math, or it could be anything that, it has sort of an algorithm or an equation about it. So introverted thinking is an attempt to bring opinions, beliefs, thought processes. It's an attempt to own them for the self, to bring them in-house, not to just hear a piece of information or hear somebody's conclusion or opinion and go, oh, I agree with that, and then adopt it.
Yeah. It's
an attempt to grab that, bring it in-house and go, okay, but what's the math behind this? Why did they come to this conclusion? What is this belief or opinion that they hold? Does it line up with how I've experienced the world and how I see things? Like, do I agree with that person because it sounds like we're on the same page, or maybe they subscribe to my a bunch of other beliefs that I have, or do I actually have a difference of opinion with this person, or a difference of opinion with maybe even a broader audience? It's an attempt to make sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we talked about how it keeps us safe. It's an attempt to not be duped.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to not hand our opinions and thoughts over to the zeitgeist or to other people that, even if they sound smart or articulate, we're trying not to undermine our own ability to spot inconsistencies, to spot the lies, even if a person doesn't realize they're lying, but recognizing that it's different from our experience of the truth.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it's a really important nutrient for making sure that we are not, that we're not letting our own biases, not letting other people's biases or their ability to sound smart or their ability to sound right or accurate. We're not letting that be a determining factor in our own personal decisions that we have to own the consequences for. If I hand over my opinions to other people and I start crafting a life around that, at the end of the day, I might go, wait, I don't agree with that. So look at all of the decisions I made, though, that fell in line with this opinion that maybe when I really think about it, that doesn't actually make sense to me.
Yeah. By the way, this is used as a strength by all TPs in the Myers-Briggs system. So
yeah,
ENTPs, INTPs, ESTPs, and ISTPs use it. All FJs actually have this as a an uncertainty part. Either their 10-year-old or 3-year-old is going to be this function. So ENFJs, ISFJs, ESFJs, and INFJs, I did that all out of order, but all the FJs will have this part of their ego syntonic. They're going to have an experience with this, but they're going to feel deeply uncertain. It's going to definitely have a huge influence in their life, whether they like it or not. Now, when we talk about introverted thinking, I would say the best way to see this, in my opinion, is it's the thinking process that can see the entire system as a snapshot. In other words, it's not a system that's in a sequence. It's a system that is operating in tandem all at the same time. Right. And you can almost see all the parts asynchronously. Asynchronously is the wrong word. How would I say it? Lighting up in random access.
Right.
There's no sequence or process to it necessarily. Now, you can add processes in, but it's taking a slice and it's creating this systems map of a reality or decisions. And so it's always consulting the systems map of understanding to make the best decisions. Well, that means to have a full systems map, you have to have a lot of information, a lot of data. And so people that have this as a preferred function tend to be the type that collect a lot of information and data, so they have a full, complete map of how the system is working so they can make the best decisions in real time. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you want to talk more to the nature of introverted thinking or how it's actually making good decisions. I think it's good to protect us against getting duped. So clean information makes a difference. Mm-hmm. It wants the most accurate, clean information it can and as much of it as it can get.
Right. And it's designed to question premises that are already assumed. It's sort of the antithesis to assumptive thinking. In order to have clean thinking, it doesn't matter if you thought about this already and you've come to a conclusion or opinion. If you get more information, that might influence your conclusion on something that's related. So as you get more information in, then you have to go back to, okay, what do I think about that again? And then you question the premises with this added information. And then you're refining your thinking over time. I think the reason why it's important to remember, or like you added that component of it's not sequential. It's not like this has to happen before this, then this. The fact that it's random access means that the way to see it, like if you line something up in a linear way, the process itself helps you understand and orientate to where you're at.
Yeah.
And so
it's positional.
It's positional, exactly. And it's like okay, so this is, we'll talk about with extroverted thinking, but this is like the way the extroverted thinking tends to parse things out and go, okay, I can see them in a sequential steps, or a sequence of an order of operations, you could call it. And then at the end, once the order of operations is concluded, does it get the result that I'm looking for effectively? I guess we're describing extroverted thinking. It's like, it doesn't work that way because sometimes information is not sequential. Sometimes information, you have to understand this idea and this idea at the same time and recognize how they relate to each other in order to recognize the importance or the value of those pieces of information. And so it tends to work best when it collects systems and models, when it collects frameworks, because you've got all these pieces of information, all this data, and you're trying to figure out what you think is true or not true, or relevant or not relevant, etc. And the only way to do that is to limit the amount of information or data by putting a framework around it and going, what does this information or data look like in this framework? And then if you collect enough frameworks, you can jump to a different framework and grab that same information and plug it into this new framework and go, okay, what does it mean there? So as one is doing that, as one is sort of vetting for this information being seen in different systems and different frameworks, it starts to get a foundational understanding of that data. What changes and what doesn't change? What is irreducible about this? Like if it's in this situation, it looks like this. If it's in this situation, it looks like this. But how did it not change?
Yes.
And so it's looking for those commonalities in order to understand, and that's where you get premises from. It's like this doesn't seem to change, depending upon the context or situation. So maybe I can like sort of rely on that as a premise of that idea.
Yes. Well, we're doing that right now, by the way. Mm-hmm. We have a framework we're using and you're using right now by listening or watching. It's the English language. Mm-hmm. We're encoding concepts or ideas in a very particular framework. The words we're using have definitions in English. But if you were to take what we're saying and translate it into another language, some of those principles may or may not translate over into the new framework. And the ones that make it over are probably introverted thinking principles, right? Because they have a definition in another language. Those are probably more core to reality than maybe something that when you translate it, it loses its fidelity, it loses its meaning.
Absolutely. And so introverted thinking is very interested in coding. It's very interested in articulation and expressing thoughts through language. So it tends to, not always, but it tends to be very fascinated by language and very fascinated by like getting the right word. What is the precise word? And that precision or that accuracy also leads it to do another thing that isn't people's favorite part of this function, but that is doing a faithful audit, looking at things through a critical eye, like critical thinking. And because of that, it can sound like criticism. It can sound like it's being critical for its own sake. And it can get a little pedantic sometimes if it's too insistent on being right as opposed to being clear, right? If it's too insistent on having like being smarter, if the user of introverted thinking rather is focused more on their ego experience of being right all the time, then it can feel a little bullying in this way. It can feel condescending. But the function itself is not like that. The function just wants clarity. It just wants to make sure that it's got the best information possible, reducing it down as much as it needs to in order to get that. And so a feature of the function is that it has the capacity to disassociate from self. And the concept of disassociation has turned into a bit of we assume that that's always a bad thing, because when people are doing therapy or when they are trying to get into their own, their own experience and process their experiences, process their memories, process their feelings, disassociation is a very bad, we don't want to compartmentalize things too much. We want to be able to process them and clean them out. So we think of disassociation from self as a bad thing. We think of it as almost like self-deception, or maybe being disloyal to the self, or just not wanting to have to deal with certain things. But the inability to disassociate from self means that we have to feel the full weight of everything all the time emotionally, or feel the full weight of everything all the time, like when we're trying to make smart decisions, but we're overwhelmed by our own emotional biases about that thing. So what's important to remember is that the capacity to disassociate from self in order to have the cleanest thinking possible, to be able to question one's maybe even beloved premises, like I believe this is truth with a capital T. Those are the ones that introverted thinking goes straight to. It's like, okay, but how do I know this to be true?
Yeah.
And reevaluating. You might even come to the conclusion that you still believe it, but the reevaluation is the important part. And so that's really fundamentally what the function is designed for.
So if this is in your back seat, though, if you're a feeler judger personality type, ENFJ, INFJ, ESFJ, ISFJ, you have an interesting relationship with this, because you're uncertain sometimes. That process you talked about where it's trying to be calibrative, help you calibrate your life, that can often dip into criticism. Sometimes if it's in the 10-year-old or the 3-year-old position, it's hard to know which is which. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with having this. If you're a feeler judger, you use harmony actually as a strength for decision making. You're going to have this polarity opposite as either your 10-year-old if you're EFJ, or as your 10-year-old if you're IFJ, your 3-year-old if you're EFJ. And the big question is this criticism or is this calibration? And I'm uncertain. The person that's using this might say, I'm uncertain on what to pay attention to. Is this just my inner mean person spirit beating me up just because I never feel good enough? Or is this actual legitimate calibration I need to listen to and make a correction of? And what I'm projecting outward maybe in criticism toward others is actually supposed to be for me, or is what I'm saying to myself actually what I should be saying to somebody else? Like, it's hard to know if this is for you or somebody else. It's hard to know if this is criticism or calibration. Yeah. So I think that's one of the challenges that FJs often will experience. Yeah. In that backseat position. But
I think the best way to look at it is an auditor.
Yeah.
It's just auditing whether or not we're being honest with ourselves. That's really what it comes down to. That's one of the reasons why it also tends to be really focused on skill development and competence, because usually we have more in ourselves. We have more than we're giving to something, and we want to believe that, we've hit a limitation. Like this function is really good for questioning limiting beliefs. In fact, that's what its job is. Its job is to make it so that we don't get trapped, not just get duped by others, but get duped by ourselves.
Yeah.
So how do you know you're missing it is the question. Like what are the quote unquote muscle cramps of missing this nutrient?
Yeah. Just like if you have a muscle cramp in your arm, you're like, ooh, maybe I need some calcium or potassium. What is the muscle cramp metaphor for this function? How do I know I need more?
So there's a couple different ways that we can see like the pain points that come along with not having this function represented well enough in our life. The first one is that we can become quite self-critical. And you would think, well, isn't that the function that's making you self-critical? And it's actually, it means you're not using it enough to be able to fully process the thought, like complete the thought and get to the other side to see what it's actually trying to point toward. Meaning that if you're just beating yourself up, you're actually not using enough introverted thinking. Because introverted thinking or accuracy will say that this is not personal. It's not about you. You're not enough as a human being, but you might be slacking in some places, and you probably should address that for your own, to make better choices in life. And so, having a complete thought, not just a half-baked thought of I'm not good enough, but having the complete thought of I'm not doing as well as I could be in these contexts. That's the nutrient. The other way that it can show up is as existential crisis, right? Not sure what you believe, not sure what your opinions are. And this can happen when you believe you're grounded in your thoughts and opinions, but somebody gives you pushback and you don't have a defense. So getting emotionally triggered in an intellectual conversation, that oftentimes will create some dissonance in a person, that they realize that as beloved as this belief is, as much as they've maybe even associated it with their identity, they haven't done the math. They haven't really made sure that they agree with and believe all of the points. And they haven't put it through the ringer themselves. And so when somebody questions their belief or asks them to give them, to give more context or basically, validate this belief, the person will get really offended, or they'll get really upset, or they'll start doing what's called ad hominems. They'll start, what's the opposite of compliment?
Insult.
Thank you. The word is insult. For some reason, my brain just went, yeah, you don't get to have the word insult. I was just going to wipe that from your brain today. Yes, insult. So they'll start relying on insults in arguments and instead of being willing to take a moment to go, maybe I do need to do more critical thinking around this belief that I'm asserting so strong.
Yeah.
And when you're not willing to do that, it sends you into a little temporary existential crisis. It sends you into like a little moment of a tailspin, and then one can react emotionally if they choose to, or get upset or stomp out or whatever. But actually, that's just a symbol that you've got some work to do. You've got some thought labor to do around your own opinions that you're asserting.
Usually that's because you believe that thing when you were in a group with somebody and it made sense when you heard it. But the moment you try to replicate out why you believe it, you're like, wait, why do I? It starts to break down quickly because you don't actually have the thinking. You just heard the soundbite or you heard the talking point from somebody and you try to, I've had this happen so many times, like, but this is, and then it starts to break down so quickly. I get super insecure and then I want to cut and run because I actually don't know what I'm talking about. I actually don't know what I believe. It was a consensus belief with a group of people that the moment I'm removed from them, I actually don't know what is mine. Mm-hmm. And I think this is why people get so hostile and weird when they're challenged on their beliefs, is because it was never theirs to begin with.
Right. Or it sounded, when they heard it, it sounded like it aligned with their values.
Yes.
And so just the fact that it immediately struck them as aligning with a value was enough to adopt it and not have to do any further digging. And I mean, in a soundbite culture, it's amazing and astonishing to me how often things sound like they're representing certain values. But if you dive down deep enough, you realize, I mean, that's the whole point of the concept of virtue signaling or value signaling. Yeah. It's like, it sounds like it's a virtue or value. It has all the trappings of it, but you have to scratch the surface and keep digging down further to see what is the actual result of this. Is it actually representing my values? Some things that sound compassionate and empathetic are actually the opposite. Some things that sound cold and unfeeling are actually the opposite. And so you can't just go based on the emotion or the feeling that you got when you heard it the first time. And you can't go based on whether or not if you repeat it, other people will, believe that you are a person of whatever the value is. You can't use just other people's image of you as the way to determine or vet an opinion or belief. And that's what introverted thinking is attempting to communicate. It doesn't matter how other people will see you if you have this belief or opinion. It doesn't matter whether or not it seems to line up with other values. It doesn't matter whether or not an entire group of people were like, yep, this is how we're going to do things. None of that matters. All that matters is the math.
Yeah. It's become a currency though, because in especially in groups, because the other side of this is an extroverted feeling or harmony function. It's become a currency of, I know that this will play well to a group if I say these words, and they'll all just, yeah, right, and elbow, and we all are in agreement with this. But the moment I talk to somebody outside that group and I say the same soundbite as a currency and they don't agree, I don't know what to do sometimes.
Yeah.
I've had that experience personally. I'm sure somebody watching or listening right now has also had that. When it worked great when everybody's on the same, in my old religious days, I'd have certain biblical phrases or things. You're like, yeah, right. And you'd say something from the Bible and everybody would be like, yeah, right. And you don't really know what you're saying. It's very surface. It sounds
Right.
smart. It sounds deep. But the moment you go outside of somebody that believes like you do, like, that's not how I see it. And you're like, oh, wait, that breaks down so fast. And you just assume everybody's in that same thinking as you are. So I would also be very mindful. Are you using certain introverted thinking concepts or beliefs as currencies inside of social groups? That's really, I think that's another place where you might you need more of it if that's what you're doing there. And then the other thing I think that comes up too is gullibility.
Yes.
If you're a person that gets taken a lot, like you tend to trust people and you get things stolen from you, you get taken advantage of, you get tricked into buying something you didn't want to buy or doing something you didn't want to do, you feel very misled. I think these experiences indicate you might need more introverted thinking.
Yeah.
And then the other option is, are you locking down and not letting anything, you have zero trust at all,
Right.
because you're worried of that happening. So you've just completely blocked any possible openness. Maybe you also need a little bit more of this to vet. No, that's probably one I can believe and actually think is okay. Gullibility is probably a bigger issue.
Yeah.
But sometimes people have too rigid boundaries around the beliefs that come in too.
Yeah. There's a healthy amount of skepticism that is encouraged by the function.
Yeah.
And if you are overly boundaried with your opinions and you won't let anybody penetrate, that is often a sign that you haven't really put a sufficient amount of thought into your belief.
It's an easy set and forget it.
Yes.
Without discretion.
You got it.
So it's easy, but is it very nuanced? Probably not. It's probably very black and white.
Yep, exactly. So then how does one get this nutrient into their diet? Like, what are some of the things that you can do in order to get more of this if you're lacking it, if you're feeling any of these pain points? And one of my favorite ways to, first of all, what's nice about it is that it's an inside job, right? It's like you don't have to necessarily go do a lot of stuff. You just have to be aware of your thinking and be more attuned to the importance of clean thinking. So we've already talked about a couple things like being willing to question premises, even beloved ones, right? Things that you would never believe. Like if you have a thought, you're like, I would never question that. I would never do this thing. I would never, you're already hemorrhaging out introverted thinking, right? Because introverted thinking is like, no, everything's on the table.
And questioning premises that are seemingly dumb to question. Like, do I really have to, Antonia, question whether murder is wrong or I believe murder is wrong? That's a premise we all kind of agree on, right? But you're talking about maybe even going down to that level of asking yourself those fundamental questions. Like,
for sure.
Do I really believe that?
Yeah.
You're probably going to come to a yes, you do, but who knows?
Well, I mean, people sanction murder all the time, actually.
Yeah.
And even somebody who says, I'm totally anti-murder might be okay with, what did they say in Texas? We'll murder you back. If you try to murder us, we'll murder you back. It's like, are there some contexts or situations where you don't actually think that murder is the worst thing in the world? You actually think that it might be contextually appropriate. Those are things one must know about themselves if they make claims like, I'm always against it. So just having a moment where you go, okay, in every situation, is there never a moment when this would be okay? Yeah. And that's questioning a premise. And so I think that's an important piece.
Well, and maybe that's where you hunt, is anywhere you say, there's never a situation where I would not believe this. Start there. Just say, is that really true? And vet that.
Yep.
That's a great place to start. And if you come back around to, no, I still believe that, at least you went through the math and the thinking of it.
Yeah. Well, and there are some things that people end up believing, even introverted thinking users, or, that's your preferred function, like a top 2 function for you. that don't necessarily have, quote unquote, all the evidence and math behind it. Like, there are plenty of people who believe in a higher power. There are plenty of people who, believe that there's something looking over them, and looking out for them. Or that they believe that there could be life form. We don't have evidence of, at this point, solid evidence of other intelligent life forms, but they believe that. There are plenty of opinions that people hold that don't necessarily have evidence. And it's not about only believing things you have evidence for. It's about being honest when you believe something you don't have evidence for. Does that make sense? It's like, you're totally allowed to believe whatever you want to. Like, I have a belief that that tarot is helpful for me. I do tarot on a regular basis. I believe it's helpful for me. I also recognize that, and I say my rationalization around it is that it brings out my own intuition. Like, I'm able to read my own intuition better when I have a guide like tarot cards. Every once in a while, it's so weird. I don't think it's just a Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't think it's just me like seeing something that isn't there, and wishful thinking. I think that it legitimately predicts things in a weird way that I can't explain.
Yeah.
Do I believe that is true? I don't know if I believe it, but I believe it enough to do tarot on a regular basis. So, I mean, I guess I am kind of believing it because I'm behaving it. But that said, if somebody pushed back and said tarot is, BS, I wouldn't get offended, right? I wouldn't immediately go into a stance of like, how dare you? It's like, I'd be like, yeah, it probably is. Or maybe it's not, but I'm not sure why it isn't. It's more about being honest with ourselves, why we're triggered when somebody pushes on our opinions. That's the more important thing. It's more important for us to be radically honest with ourselves that when we hold opinions that don't have sufficient evidence to assert them outward and say everybody should believe this thing. I have very few of those. Very few things do I believe that everybody should agree upon or everybody should believe it. Because I recognize that people are coming to conclusions very subjectively based on their own experiences and, the things that strike them, like what makes sense to them. So the important thing, though, isn't to only ever believe things that have a ridiculous amount of research or validation or whatever. It's that when you believe something that doesn't hold that kind of water, that you own it, that you recognize it, that you don't get triggered, that you don't pretend as if it has all of this evidence behind it. Like, believe in a higher power, just recognize that there was no camera rolling at the cosmic egg. So we don't know, right? It's like, we just don't know. And if there was a video camera, cool, that'd be awesome, but we don't have one yet. And so does that mean you're not allowed to believe in a higher power causing the cosmic egg? No, of course. Totally believe that. And live or die on it, right? Like, dedicate your life to, some sort of higher religious ethic or order. Like, make life choices based on it. Only choose partners or spouses that agree with you. Like, raise your children that way. And like, all of this is fine as long as you recognize that it's not based on empirical evidence enough to push it off on somebody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a very subjective space. So one of the ways that you can do that, other than just questioning premises, is also what's called steel manning. We did a podcast episode on this a while back. I don't remember the episode, but we talked about the importance of steel manning. And steel manning is the antidote to what's called straw manning. In a straw man, when you're in a debate with somebody, when you do a straw man argument, it's basically like trying to it's finding the weakest part of somebody's argument and attacking it and acting as if that represents their whole argument. So it's kind of a cheap shot. It's like a debate tactic that's a cheap shot. Steel manning goes the opposite direction. It takes somebody's argument that you disagree with and it finds all the strongest points. And in fact, it reinforces it for them. It helps your opponent find how strong their argument actually is. And when you are forced to do that in behalf of an opponent or somebody who doesn't agree with you, it means that you have to address all of the valid points of their argument. And it forces you to reevaluate your own.
Well, shift in their perspective to even reinforce it.
Exactly. Well, actually, you don't have to necessarily shift into their worldview. You just have to understand why their argument could make sense to somebody, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the math of this argument and what's the strongest point? And then once you've done that, you've been persuaded probably by certain things. You can find common ground where the two of you do agree. And then when you get to a point of disagreement, then now you recognize that maybe you didn't have it all figured out, but you still stand by certain aspects of your opinion as well. So steel manning, the opposite argument from whatever your own is a great way of practicing introverted thinking. And so a really great way of doing this is learning formal logic, right? Or learning debate tactics. And sort of recognizing what this looks like, and then just being willing to have something that is very personal to you, not actually have evidence, right? Like recognizing when something is important to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you that all the math is there, and some people don't care about that, and that's fine. It's just it's like you got to recognize, it's like you might be believing things that don't actually make that much sense.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to, but you just have to recognize it.
Well, we all do it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of owning it on that front. Okay. So then we talked about some of the qualities of this if we feel there's a deficiency in this area. And again, this is for anybody, not just people that use introverted thinking or accuracy or even harmony with it in their back seat. I mean, I have this, but it's in my shadow.
Right.
Introverted thinking or accuracy is going to pull me from the shadows without me knowing what's going on. And so it's good to be aware of this when it could be undermining to me. And maybe you're a personality type that doesn't have this in your conscious functions, but it's in your shadow. I think it's important to pay attention to where it can hijack. Again, a program like our personality life path mentorship can help tune into some of these, especially if they're in the shadow. That's the point of the program. Let's flip to the other thinking function now. Let's talk about effectiveness. That's what we call it. Its technical name is extroverted thinking. So if introverted thinking accuracy is all about the inner beliefs, the inner thought, the inner consistent logic, it's a little more subjective because it's the person's interpretation of the information and how they're putting it together. I would say extroverted thinking has more of an objective framework. There's still a lot of subjectivity here, but it's at least looking at what's in the outside world. I'm looking at a table across the room right now. That's a real object that was created in the external world that thinking had to be applied to create. Mm-hmm. And so we think about all the things that live and exist in the external world that have been built or ameliorated or designed or constructed. We're really talking about the result of extroverted thinking or effectiveness, applied thought in the external world. And again, this is a little different than introverted thinking. This is more sequential because things have to happen on a timeline in a certain order. Like I can't put the legs on the table until, maybe I have the screws bought from the hardware store, for example. I can't, like one step has to come before the other because this is actually happening out here in the real world. I'm not just imagining it internally or processing something internally or thinking it internally. So this is a very powerful process that gets a lot done. It's conflated often with leadership and management and money. But it doesn't just live there. There's a lot of other qualities that effectiveness has, but that tends to be how we see it because those things are so obvious to us in our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's talk a little about the qualities of this. Again, this is a strength or a preferred function for all TJs in the Myers-Briggs system. So ENTJs, INTJs, ESTJs, and ISTJs will have this as a preferred cognitive function of making decisions from this place. All the FPs will have this as a little bit more uncertain part of themselves. So ENFPs, INFPs, ESFPs, and ISFPs will have this as either a 10-year-old or a 3-year-old in the backseat of their car. And so they're going to have a relationship with this, but it's not going to be as certain as the TJs have it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the function itself is designed to make sure, well, when we talked about how it keeps us safe from spinning our wheels. It keeps us safe from throwing endless amounts of resource at things that have no ROI to them. And if resources are not limitless, which they never are, then we can get ourselves in a really big bind if we don't have a good relationship to this function. As you mentioned, it gets so much done. Like people are able to watch this podcast because extroverted thinking work went into, like not just the chairs we're sitting in, but the microphones that we're talking into, and then all of the audio and video capture devices, and then the ability to produce it and then broadcast it on the internet. Like all of this has been created through extroverted thinking, making things happen in the outside world. And then the ability to watch it on a device, right? Like it's like all of that is like the substrate of it is the capacity to imagine a project and then work it from the moment of inception all the way to the conclusion of the result of the product that you wanted. So when we don't have this function in our lives, we feel the sting of it a lot. So to give it its due, it really is a function about progress. It's a function about making sure that we are that we have something to show for our work, right? Like there's a lot of, I would say, there's a lot of people that feel a lack of self-confidence. They feel a lack of self-worth. They feel a lack of not sure where they fit in the ecosystem of everything. They don't know what they have to offer. And so there can be a bit of an attitude that extroverted thinking is the problem because it is basing interoperable value, right? Like our ability to operate with other people, our value on the things that we can produce.
Yeah.
And so it feels like less of it is the important thing, but actually I think we need more of it. I think we need more symbols to ourselves of what we're able to accomplish. We need more symbols to ourselves of the progress that we're making in our life. That we can create value and that we can create so much value that somebody else is willing to give us value in return for it. To be able to not just spin our wheels, but actually see on a timeline our ability to make things happen.
Yeah.
And that concept of it being sequential means we can't, I mean, like it's kind of like, losing weight is not going to the gym once and eating healthy meals for a day. It's like there's a timeline to it, and you can speed it up a little bit by, eating a few of slight, a couple hundred less calories than maybe you would have before, or like maybe doing a little bit more exercise. But there's a limitation on how quick you can go without damaging your body. So that's anything that's worth doing, anything that's worth having a goal at the other side, invariably requires steps. It requires patience. It requires charting progress. It requires metrics. It requires all of these things to be attuned to and to steward the process from the beginning into the end. We can't just one and done it. We can't just like show up and do a thing and then expect it to be, like, oh, I did my thing for the day, so therefore I should get all the reward. And because of that, it's hard, right? Like that's the point, is like it's hard. Just like introverted thinking is thought labor and it's hard. Extroverted thinking or effectiveness is hard. And that's why when we do get the fruit at the other side, we do get a return on investment. It's why we get a reward of self-confidence. It's why we get a reward of like watching ourselves having done something and then being able to, pick the fruit of our labor and feel good about it. And so if we're missing this nutrient, one of the ways that it shows up for us is that we don't really feel like we're accomplishing anything in life. We don't really understand our place in anything. We wonder what our value is. We're uncertain about, our ability to show up and make things happen. We just kind of feel like a general sense of, like why am I even doing what I'm doing? There's like a listlessness that comes in there.
I love the American football sport. So American football, I think, is the most extroverted thinking effectiveness example in gameplay we have. So it's a really great compressed look at extroverted thinking. You have hierarchy. So the coach is calling the shots, but they have sub-coaches that help call smaller shots. And the players are creating a play, 11 of them on a field in coordination with each other to run a play to gain progress, like you said, down the field. And they have to get 10-yard increments to reset the downs as they go. And if they do those 10 yards, they keep resetting and making progress all the way down to score a goal. It's all about field position. It's about managing the time clock. It's about, making sure that the plays are constructed well and you run them and you see what happened, you adjust and run the next one. So it's like set it up, run it, come back, regroup, set it up, run it, come back, regroup. And it's all done from the top down. Like the coach isn't on the field doing it. Your players are getting the plays. So it's very constructed and it's interoperable. Everybody's got to have good communication and be able to connect with each other and have, sync up with the plays, clear communication, clear objectives of what each person's role is on the field of what to do, because those constantly are switching. You take on different roles based on the play you're accomplishing. So I think it's a really interesting framework for what's actually happening. And I just put it onto gameplay out of the business world because it's so easy to talk about in business.
Yeah, it's true.
And money and all these things that are so survival based. But extroverted thinking can be used in a lot of areas. I think American football, again, is a really good example of how sophisticated it can get just in gameplay alone.
Yeah, and I think it's also American football is a good analogy for it as well, because it teaches people to not be too undermined by their losses.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you do put a lot of effort into an extroverted thinking project and it doesn't end up working out for some reason.
Yeah.
And that can feel extremely demoralizing. But American football just goes, okay, but then that was that game and we have the next game. And then, or maybe that was that season and we have the next season, right? Like there's ways of going like, okay, like let's pick ourselves back up and let's start over and let's try again. And so I think that that's a great way of illustrating this, because sometimes it just doesn't work out, right? Sometimes you put a lot of heart and soul into something and it wasn't your fault that it didn't work out, but it doesn't mean that you stop, right? Extroverted thinking encourages us to keep going even when there's a loss.
Well, I think that one of the biggest gifts it gives us is the sum is greater than the parts, is basically with an interoperable group that's well constructed with a lot of delegation and plans, a lot can be built and accomplished. Like we can really achieve a lot as humans if we tune into this energy and coordinate with it. So it can be very valuable for us personally to finish a project, tuning into the energy. If I just want to accomplish something, get through my lists and make something in the world. But it really comes into usefulness when I'm delegating or I'm working with a team, or we all have to be on the same page to accomplish a goal together. This is where it starts to really become even more powerful than just a single use in a person. So I would say that another indication is if you're not a very good team player, now it could maybe speak to extroverted feeling, which we'll talk about on the next episode. Possibly it's some feeling stuff in here. But if you're resistant to hierarchy or the role that you need to play at work or in a team or in a family or whatever it is that you're, we need you to play this role and you're not playing that role well maybe you need a little extroverted thinking in your life to know why it matters to play that role. We're all on the quote field of life or field of this, whatever is happening. And if you don't play your role, person XYZ, well, now you're kind of bringing the rest of us down. The entire team is depending on you to make sure you're doing your quote unquote job in this.
Yep.
So again, it could be a little bit of extroverted feeling potentially in that, but I would say extroverted feeling is not so much about working in your role to accomplish something. It's more about keeping the harmony going. This is particularly about output, about deliverables, about showing up and giving your all in a, again, problem-solving way for the role that you're responsible for.
Yep.
So I think that's another thing to tune into. You might have a deficiency here if that's a challenge for you.
Yep. I also think that if you struggle with having goals, like you just don't have any goals, you don't even think about it, you feel really demotivated, that it means that there probably needs to be a little bit more extroverted thinking or effectiveness in your life, because extroverted thinking, like that's what it does, is it starts with a goal in mind. And that's how it motivates itself to continue on, to make that progress, because it's got an end that it's trying to accomplish. So if you're struggling to have goals at all, it means that you need a little bit more of this energy in your life. And then I would also say, because to speak to the point of American football, extroverted thinking has a system it sets up. Now, this is different than introverted thinking systems, because introverted thinking systems are more like mental models, like the systems of tracking nodes and recognizing what the emergents are.
Myers-Briggs is a system.
Myers-Briggs is a system
for introverted thinking, right?
That's
It's
right.
where you place all the cognitive functions on the car model, for example. Our car
Exactly.
model is another system or a framework you could use.
Yep, exactly.
But that's internal. That's a mental model.
Exactly. These are systems outside of us. So we have to set up a system in order to, like make those steps work, and to make sure that the systems are, sort of guiding us to the best output possible. So if you find that all your systems are broken, if you find that you can't get basic things done, like I was talking to a friend of mine who has INTJ preferences, and he's like, if my bathroom is clean, I know my systems are all right. But if I can't even manage to clean my bathroom, I know that my systems are all off. So are your systems good? Do you have markers? Do you have evidence that you are, like, your systems are doing well? Or do you find that your systems are broken and you're really struggling to get basic things done? You probably need a little bit more extroverted thinking in your life.
It's more than just getting things done, though. It's also resource management, right? So it's like when you run out of toilet paper, you have a system for reordering toilet paper or getting new toilet paper into your house. That kind of resource base as well, because that supports the operation of getting something done.
Yeah. And
So-
are you resourced enough to be able to buy the toilet paper? Are you are you making your own revenue enough to be able to handle your own stuff?
Yeah. Now, I would say a lot of people would struggle in this area and say, well, you don't understand the job market and how hard it is to make resource. And again, it's external to the person. They might complain and say, it's really easy maybe to feel critical toward me as a listener or watcher right now, that I may not have this dialed in, but I'm at the mercy of the world. I think a lot of people feel at the mercy of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. Like, well, the jobs are hard. Maybe what I went to college for isn't available. I think a lot of people struggle with that, and they're like, and why should I even be defined on what I do? Aren't I a human? I want to go work with some faceless, nameless corporation just to put time in for this energy. And I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. So I'm fine with this missing in my life. I'm okay with that. Almost developing an attitude toward it and wanting it to stay over there. I don't want this anywhere near me. I don't like it. It makes me feel bad. It doesn't play nice with me anyway. There's not a lot of opportunity for me. I feel like I'm being measured on it when I should be measured on my humanity, not on what I can do in life. It's like a lot of people have an issue with this just as a category wholesale. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have any comments to that, Antonia. If you do, I'm teeing you up for it. If you don't, I just teed you up to be like, uh-oh.
I know. Not sure what to say. No, I almost always have things to say. So I think that it is easy to demonize extroverted thinking and go, why should I have to be judged based on this? As mentioned before, part of it is because your entire world is made possible by the function. Like everything you're doing is because somebody built it. Everything you're doing is somebody put life force and energy and time and effort and thought into, like this, whatever chair you're sitting on right now, or whatever your listening device you've got on. Like that was extroverted thinking. That's us producing things in behalf of each other. And so because this is basically how we work together, is that we provide valuable things for each other, then if somebody opts out, unless they, and the thing I'm about to say, like, I think this is extremely noble if a person wants to do this, but unless they opt out and then go homestead somewhere, right, in the middle of nowhere, and they are 100% self-sufficient, and they're producing their own clean water, and they're producing all of their own food, and they're producing, like, if they choose to live off the grid, that's totally noble. But that's a lot of extroverted thinking. That's a ton of extroverted thinking. You're just doing it without the middleman of money, right? And you're just doing your resource by yourself. But if you are engaging and interacting with the rest of society and civilization, if a person chooses to opt out of extroverted thinking, basically what they're saying is that everybody else needs to subsidize my experience. I'm the one person that doesn't need to contribute. Everybody else is contributing in some way. Everybody else is pouring into the system and continuing to, be busy making things happen. Except for me, I'm going to opt out. Well, the only way you can really opt out without other people's life force now subsidizing your experience is if you go homestead. That's it. Otherwise, you're effectively taking from the system without giving a return. And as amazing as some human beings are, I mean, if you can parlay your personality and your character into a value generation system, do it, right? There's plenty of celebrities out there who, just because they're cool people that other people want to hang out with, end up, getting opportunities to get paid to just show up and exist. That's awesome. If you can parlay that, that's amazing. The overwhelming majority of human beings cannot do that. And so, it's like, well, I'm a person. I shouldn't have to do things. I should just be able to exist and be, and that should be enough. It's like, well, it's enough to want your company, but it's not enough to put my life force into making sure that you get to eat or that you get to have a roof over your head. So you can't, unfortunately, the way that society is set up is that you can't really make that choice without making it for everybody around you as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you spoke to that. I don't have anything else to add to that, except that that's something I think some people struggle with around effectiveness. So we can just leave it there. Unless somebody...
Well, I was going to say, you might disagree with how people choose to spend their life force. You might look around at the system and say that the system is, that it causes us to spin our wheels a lot in terms of not really getting very far or making a lot of progress as people. That is a totally valid complaint. But that's not less extroverted thinking. It's more. It's being smarter about it. It's about going in and like doing your job to change systems. And that's hard to do. And it's a David and Goliath situation, but that's the only way that those kinds of things happen.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be opting out and doing less of it. It would be doubling down and doing more of it, but then making the progress and the goals more aligned with your worldview of how things should be set up and less aligned with other people that you believe are wasting time.
Yes. So it's my belief that the internal judging functions are dismissed by people and the extroverted judging functions are taken for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about this when we get to harmony, extroverted feeling on the next episode. I think a lot of people that use that would feel this feeling of emotional labor.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a lot of things that are quote unquote non-compensated, or they're filling in between the cracks and helping smooth things out emotionally. And sometimes they feel the burden of that because it's so much and there's no reciprocal energy sent back. I think there's something here with extroverted thinking as well. We take it for granted. I mean, we walk into the grocery store at the time of this recording. If I go to the grocer to buy food, inflation's high, so the cost is high. But if you think about it, like even the cost of eggs right now at the time of this recording is high, but they should be like $100 a carton. If you think about like, I don't have chickens in my backyard. I didn't have to do anything. I have to feed them. I have to worry about them being sick. I didn't have to go get the eggs, clean the eggs, harvest the eggs, bring them to the store. I just drive to the store, hand over some money, and I get eggs ready to cook right now.
Yep.
And all my food comes that way. Like the amount of infrastructure and systems set up to deliver food at very low cost relatively to what it would take me to grow it or produce it on my own, and often I just wouldn't have it, is incredible. The amount, I mean, I can go get a banana right now. At the time of this recording, it's winter time. I go buy a banana.
In Pennsylvania.
Yeah, for like 50 cents at not even just the grocer. I could go to like a convenience store and get one.
Right.
I mean, King Solomon didn't even have that kind of wealth available to him. So extroverted thinking has brought the availability to us so much. And in the United States here, I talk about this on our personality life path mentorship often. When we get to this week, we can turn on a water faucet here, pretty much any town in America, and drink directly out of the faucet without getting sick. And no one will charge me for that. They'll be like, yeah, have some free water. It costs them pennies to produce it.
Yeah.
It's almost free, pure drinking water anywhere in the country.
Yep.
That's an incredible amount of infrastructure that I just take for granted until I travel to a country that doesn't have clean drinking water. And now I'm hunting bottled water all the time, right? I'm trying to find the next bottled water because I can't just drink out of a tap.
Yes.
So it really, the void of it becomes very clear to me when I don't have these things. Mm-hmm. So I think we don't have a lot of gratitude for the structures that bring us the things.
Yeah.
We tend to bitch and complain and whine when the things aren't there, when eggs are expensive, or maybe this one product that I like is off the shelves in the grocery. I'm complaining about that. But just think about how grateful I should be for having this at all available that ubiquitously. Any possible food item I want is available to me because of extroverted thinking system setup.
Yeah. So
I think it's easy just to go, oh, we don't need that, and forget how much that's important in our world. And so I think a deficiency here is very common because it's so easy to ignore or just not pay attention to these aspects of life.
Yeah. And to harken back to introverted thinking, if Joel talking about the price of eggs immediately puts you in a political frame, as opposed to meeting his point, which is that we have extraordinary systems set up that we take for granted, then you might need to do some introverted thinking work, which is why does a single talking point immediately make me think of a political position that I want to fight for?
I didn't even think about that.
And so, because that's the first thing I thought of is I was like, don't talk about the price of eggs. Everybody's going to politicize that. And I'm like, why do we politicize that? Why do we immediately go to a talking point and then have to now, I mean, somebody's going to write a comment about well, the reason why the price of eggs is so important. And then they're going to write a whole bunch of stuff about basically their worldview and politics and opinions. And as opposed to going oh yeah, that's a good point. You're right. We do have a lot of really sophisticated systems that we've set up. I should be grateful for that. Right. And so that's an introverted thinking problem, just FYI. So that said, what do we do about infusing more extroverted thinking into our world? How do we add this nutrient in? And you know what? I've been doing a lot of talking on this particular episode. You're the person who has extroverted thinking as a preferred function. What do you do to infuse extroverted thinking in your life?
Well, I do think that we need to be grateful for the systems. I think gratitude is one of the things I always do to tune into any of the functions that I'm trying to understand or make more of in my life. I want to say, okay, why should I be grateful for this? In any frame. And we actually recorded an entire series on why the world needs each one of these 8 functions. We have an episode about extroverted thinking, effectiveness, why the world needs it so much.
Yep.
Tuning into the gratitude, I think, is step number 1. Step 2 is be okay with hierarchy and goals. I think if you can start to see goals as not an enemy of something that's desirable. Hey, I want even small goals. Like I just want to go out of town this weekend, or I want to paint my wall this one color, or something small and a goal, and then back from that goal, find all the steps to get to it and just start practicing that. But I also think hierarchy, be okay with a role and goal. There you go. Be okay with stepping into a role on the team, if you will. And that's your responsibility and that's your output, and making peace with the ability to sit with that and say, my responsibility is to execute on the team this thing. And I have a goal for this outcome.
Yeah.
And getting comfortable with that, with gratitude, I think could bring a lot more of this into your life.
Yeah, for sure. Having a goal and then making the goal happen. And like you said, it could be something simple. It could be like, I mean, right now my basement really needs attention. It just does, right? Like we have extra rooms down there. People have stayed down there. I've just kind of ignored it. But the truth is that I need to give some attention to the basement. That's a project, right? That's a whole project. So infusing a little bit of extroverted thinking in my life might be, I'm going to get my basement done.
Well,
right?
breaking that into tasks.
And breaking into tasks.
That'd be an actual really good
Yes.
exercise. Take your project. What does basement done look like? What problem am I trying to solve? And you identify what it looks like, and then breaking down the steps to get to quote unquote basement done.
Yep.
Whatever that means for you.
Yep, for sure.
And then you start working those steps, and you now have a plan to go for.
And I think another one is ambition. Just having a little bit, like tuning into the energy of ambition, because progress can mean like trying to get to a goal you've already considered. But it could also be, once you've concluded goals, to ask yourself, what is the more that I can be reaching out for? The other side of the aisle of this, of introverted thinking, it's us being radically honest with ourselves when we're limiting ourselves for no good reason, right?
Yeah.
Like we might have these limiting beliefs because they have secondary benefits, or we are trying to stay loyal to somebody in our life that taught us this originally, or whatever. Like there's all sorts of reasons why we might have the thoughts we have. But introverted thinking goes, yeah, be that as it may, is it true? Right? Like where are you leaving money on the table? Like where are you actually, like what do you actually think? And could you ameliorate and be better? Can you build competence and skill? Can you do a better job? Are you lying to yourself and just kind of resting on your laurels? And I think extroverted thinking can also serve that same purpose. It can encourage us to reach out for something bigger. It can encourage us to get a little ambitious in the things that we attempt to accomplish. We can maybe bite off a little bigger of a bite than we're used to chewing, or we can ask ourselves what the next rung on the ladder might be. Can I maybe ask my boss for a raise? Can I maybe, go for something a little bit like maybe outside of my comfort zone, but something I want to really challenge myself to do? This is an achievement frame. So can I challenge myself and achieve something a little bigger? And I think taking an honest assessment about like where am I allowing myself to get away with like a lack of ambition? Like how can I be a little bit more ambitious? And I think not just for its own sake, but because ambition is actually spiritually rewarding. It actually is. Now, it might not be ambition in a traditional sense. Like a lot of times people think of ambitious career paths. And you might not be a person who's ambitious for your career path, but you might be ambitious for art, or you might be ambitious in behalf of your family, or you might be ambitious for, to be extremely good at, a basic skill or something. But where can you ask more of yourself? And then, like you mentioned, break those down into tasks and just start getting busy and just watch yourself make progress. It could be something like, I want to make more money this year. Or it could be something like, I want to lose some weight. Or it could be honestly, the goal can be anything you want. But just getting going and starting on it and recognizing that, yeah, it's not meant to be easy. But it is meant to be rewarding. It is meant to be able to watch myself perform and accomplish things and metricize them and go, yeah, I guess I did do that. That's pretty awesome. I guess I did achieve. And achievement is definitely a nutrient that the human soul requires.
So we've been talking about the two thinking functions. We see these as problem-solving functions. Introverted thinking accuracy is our relationship with the internal logic, core principles and beliefs, and reevaluating our thinking over and over again, even down to the premise level, to ensure that we're basing our thought off of good principles, sound thinking. Extroverted thinking is more about applied thinking in the outer world, getting something done, results, actually accomplishing something or having results from our efforts, making progress, managing resource and time and energy and timelines and all of these things. So we all use both of these functions. We use all 8 functions. Our personality type will show us which are our preferred functions that we use, and then which ones are our blind spots, and maybe even in the shadow, pulling us from the shadow we don't even recognize. We do a lot of work in our Personality Life Path mentorship around this. It's an 8-week program where each week we come together on a live call and we tune into one of these cognitive functions, and we look at how it's showing up for you in your life. And we give you some exercises to go and test that relationship in your life in real time. And then you come back on the next call and you report about it. We unpack it, and then we open up the energies for the next one. We do that for 8 weeks straight. And then we have a 3-day live event where we unpack all the learning. We create a systems map of your life and then the steps to take on your life path going forward. So making those big adjustments is really good for people in transition, because often the changes we need to make are things from our shadow that we're unaware of. They're either limiting us or encouraging us to be more, but we can't see it. And so a program like this really helps audit each one of those energies through those 8 weeks and understand our relationship to it. Again, we need all of them represented. It's just in what order, to what amount, how are they influencing us? So I would recommend, if you want to go further in some of this learning, go down into Personality Life Path mentorship. If we're opening enrollment at the time of this recording, take advantage of this. It's an incredible, powerful program. Many students have called it life-changing. I would say it's changing our lives every time we teach it. We learn something as we go through it. It shapes and shifts me too every single time, because we also will dip into the same energies with everyone. And if you're just more starting out, you're not ready for something as deep as that, because it's a pretty deep program going into the shadow stuff. Just get started with an owner's manual. We have one for all the 16 personality types. We have one for your type. And it's a great place to get started to build an ergonomic life that can keep you in flow, help you overcome some of your limitations, some of the places where you're stuck, some of the bad habits that each personality type can get into. It addresses all of that, and we're always adding to it. So I definitely want you to check out one of those owner's manuals as well over at personalityhacker.com. And while you're there, enrolling in PLP or checking out one of the owner's manuals, getting one of those for yourself, make a comment below this episode. Let us know what you're thinking. What's coming up for you as we talk about the thinking functions and the quote unquote vitamin deficiencies of them. Do you have a deficiency in one of these in your life? We'd love to hear from you with a comment, question, or more importantly, share your story, your compressed experience. We want to hear from you.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on a variety of different platforms, and both Apple Podcasts and a bunch of Android platforms. And if you want to leave us a rating and review, well, that would be just fine. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, and I read all of the reviews, and they're very inspiring. They help us keep going. I haven't said this in a while, but we do have a book. It's a pretty good one. It's called Personality Hacker, and you can get that at all major book retailers. If you want to grab a copy on Amazon, it's definitely there available for you. And it was a labor of love, so you should go grab yourself a copy if you do not have one yet.
Next week, we're going to cover the feeling functions as we wrap up this 4-part series of vitamin deficiencies in the cognitive functions. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.